Jacksonville. A child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. The poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
The weekend was on the 11th day of August 2018 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We roll along, recapping the events of the previous week. We'll start off here with a monumental election in the state of Missouri. There was an initiative on the ballot. The former governor, who has been, as they say, helped out of office, Gaddens, signed it, and then it went as an initiative, a petition on a right to work. It was sponsored by the Republican Party. It was defeated by almost 70% in the state of Missouri. Also out of Missouri, and we'll get to this in a few minutes here, Leslie McSpadden. She's the mother of the late Michael Brown, who was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri, is now running for city council there in Ferguson. We'll hear that announcement in a minute. But first we'll go to Uncle Carl Rove. The Uncle Carl is writing in the Wall Street Journal on the 9th of August 2018. The title of his article, "The Blue Wave May Be Rescending. Well, that is a pronouncement, in our opinion, is very early. After Republican State Senator Troy Brazerson's narrow victory in a special election as Ohio 12th District, Republicans understand what of 23-year-old war correspondent Winston Churchill. Nothing in life is as exhausting as to be short at without result. Without results. The Tuesday vote was a special election before the midterm. Balderson leads by 1,754 votes, and we have roughly 3,435 provisional and military votes still need to be counted. The results denied the Democrats momentum that would have jazzed up their base and helped fill the coffers of dozens of their House candidates. That is just sheer propaganda. It's not the case of that particular race. The Republicans won because Braderson was a good candidate, because his rival, Danny O'Connor, ended up embracing, and this is where we talked about it last night on Friday Jobber, Nancy Pelosi. He never did embrace Nancy Pelosi, but the victory was also a GOP team effort. DJ Trump carried the district by 11 points, held a rally there last weekend. His critic, John Kirsch, who represented the district in Congress before becoming governor, endorsed Balderson. The Paul Ryan Associated Leadership Fund spent $3.3 million. And the Republican National Committee in Ohio's Republican Party mounted a massive a big get out the vote effort. Now, this is a district that had been in the Republican hands of 30 or 40 years, period. While Republicans can't mount gigantic efforts in every race this fall, neither can Democrats, who left claiming a moral victory for coming close to being an open Republican seat, but close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. Well, this was a district that Danny O'Connor was literally outspent 10 times over. They had to put an unusual effort into this. They got John Kasich, who represented that district at one time, to come out and endorse Balderson. They pulled out all stops in this district. And still, the voting was very close. We don't have, obviously, provisional ballots yet, and we don't have military ballots. Military ballots usually are not that many in this district. Now, this was a special election before the midterm, and we'll have the midterm in November. So, in other words, this is not over until the fat lady sings, as they used to say. This is one of the very unusual situations here. He goes then on to still, it's not all roses and butterflies for the Republicans. Charlie Cook, the partisan vote index for Ohio 12, put the Republicans at +7, but the Republicans carried this district less than 1 point this week. In other words, Danny O'Connor ran 6.1 points better than the district's PVI in a competitive special House election this year, and last Democrats have beat the PVI by an average of 5.1 points. Worse yet, Republicans, the Cook report says there are 50 at-risk seats that lean Republican by as much or less than the district. Balderson won by the skin of his teeth. Democrats would need to win less than half of those 50 districts to take the House. Mr. Cook labels these districts as likely Democrat pickups, 6 as lean Democrats, 24 as toss-ups, 17 as lean Republicans. Larry Sabato's crystal ball has comparative projections. We have reported from both of these handicappers. Well, one's a handicapper. Mr. Cook is the best handicapper in the U.S. Larry Sabato is crystal ball. We've looked at it also. Period. The good news for Republicans, back to Karl Rove, is that 36 of these 50 most vulnerable Republican districts, Republican incumbents are seeking re-election, most with strong district ties, name donation, identification, and more cash on hand. When the Democrats, incumbents don't matter in special elections, but it will loom large in the fall. No doubt about that. No doubt about the money factor. Bottom line is, while Republicans will certainly lose House seats in November, they have a fighting chance to keep their majority. They must re-elect almost all of the 36 incumbents whose districts are R+7 or less, but special effort into 8 open seats rated toss-ups are lean Republican, and the PVI is even or tilts to Republicans. Go hand in hand with a handful of open Democratic seats that lean Republican. If they do this, they just might hold the House. Well, holding in the House is a different situation. Elsewhere in the Midwest, there's also some good news for Republicans in 5 of the 6 competitive districts. This is in Michigan, Kansas. GOP primary turnout was larger than the Democratic totals. Well, that in itself, depending obviously on which districts you're talking about, and we'll get to the Kansas election, and this looms pretty large. There are two factors that loom large. One in Missouri, the right to work initiative sponsored by the Republicans. Uncle Carl doesn't talk about that. Was handily defeated by almost 70%. That bodes well for grassroots organization of working people. I can recall, last year listening at commercials on St. Louis Cardinal baseball games sponsored by the trade unions, and that particular proposition was bad for Missouri. It was bad for working people, period. So Missouri fights back right to work. Whereas now in Michigan, we have a little different situation there. On the Gateway Snyder, Michigan and the Republicans there had turned the UAW state into a right-to-work state in Michigan. Of course, Kansas has been a right-to-work state since the days we participated in elections in Kansas, in particular in Wichita. And we'll go to that in a minute and talk about what happened out in Kansas. There's an all fight there in the state of Kansas, and this is very significant in what is happening. And also in Ferguson, Missouri, Ms. McSpadden, that's the mother of the late Michael Brown, who was the man that single-handedly, his murder sparked a movement. And that was before Colin Kaepernick took a knee. So in other words, that is a conversation that radiates throughout the nation, whether it be in the National Football League and in sports in particular. We're reading a book by Howard Bryant talking about the history of sports. We'll review this book, but let's firstly go to Kansas and the ground there on the ground in the state of Kansas. 110 votes now separate Collier, who's the Republican governor of Kansas, and Kobach. The lawyers have been called. The Secretary of State, Chris Kobach, handed over his election responsibilities on Friday to his top deputy, who is known as a staunch conservative, to remain as he remains locked in a tight race with Governor Collier, the Republican nominee. Kobach, who argued voter fraud is a significant problem, also accused Collier of using rhetoric that may undermine public confidence in the election process. Now, this has been the stock and trade of Kobach, period. And with the fraud commission under DJ Trump, that itself was a fraud, and they were forced to disband it. And those are the things that people have to look at. The Assistant Secretary of State, Eric Rucker, will take over Kobach's duties and will serve on the State Board of Canvassing, which will certify the final decision results. Rucker donated $1,000 to Kobach's campaign last fall, according to financial records. Although I would discharge my duties ethically, impartially, and responsibly, I have carefully considered your requests and have decided that it is in the best interest of the citizens of Kansas that I permit another to perform the duties of Secretary of State until the conclusion of the 2018 primary process. This is Kobach's letter to the governor, Collier, on Friday. Kobach's letter came in response to a letter from Collier Thursday that demanded. Now, and this is the whole situation. This is not something that Chris Kobach did voluntarily. He was asked to recuse himself, demanding from the election advice to county election offices. Kobach rejected the allegation from Collier that his office was given electoral advice. As governor of Kansas, your unrestrained rhetoric has the potential to undermine the public confidence in the election process. May I suggest that you trust the people of Kansas have made the right decision at the polls, and our election officials will properly determine the results as they do in every election. Now, this was from Kobach here, but in response, Collier's campaign spokesman, this is Kendall Marr again, said Rucker is a good and decent man, but said his appointment doesn't address the concerns about conflict of interest. Governor Collier wants Kobach to ask the Attorney General Derek Schmidt to provide legal advice to county election officials. We hope he will consider our request to allow the Attorney General to provide the proper legal advice to county election officials to reassure Kansas that the election between the Secretary and the Governor is free from conflict of interest. That's Mr. Marr speaking there. Kobach said in a later letter that turning over his duties to Smith would violate the state law. I will not breach the public trust and arbitrarily assign my responsibilities to another office that is not granted such authority under the laws of the state of Kansas. Rucker was a top aide to former Kansas Attorney General Phil Klein. Rucker himself found himself on the scrutiny by an attorney disciplinary panel in 2010 that he had looked into how Klein's office conducted itself. It's investigated later the abortion clinic debate. This is Dr. George Tiller in Wichita and the Planned Parenthood in Overland Park. Klein's office faced a far-reaching investigation into complaints that he misjudged and sent a grand jury during the probe into abortion providers. While Klein would later have his law license suspended for what the Kansas Supreme Court found to be clear and convincing evidence of professional misconduct. Rucker in 2010 received an informal admonition for not correcting misleading information he provided to the higher court, that's the Supreme Court of Kansas. Rucker's attorney in the disciplinary case was Cecil Stiegel, who would later go on to serve as former Governor Brownback, the general counsel before becoming a justice on the Supreme Court. Rucker was also the subject of a lawsuit last year from a former worker in the Secretary of State's office. The former worker alleged in the federal lawsuit that her situation was a case of reverse religious discrimination and described Rucker as telling her grandmother that she had been fired because the staffer was divisive and didn't go to church. Oh boy. Rucker placed a practical emphasis on church as a factor. The judge rejected the worker's claim. The jury, although the trial provoked further scrutiny of Rucker's work within the office. Representative John Carmichael of Wichita said he assumed that Kobach would turn over his responsibilities to an elected professional within the Secretary of State's office. However, it appears that the Secretary of State is not sensitive to the appearance of impropriety, and by appointing his longtime right-hand flunky Eric, that's my words, not the Eric Rucker, he is not eliminating the appearance of impropriety, but only transferring the responsibility to another one of his political cronies. Kobach noted that Rucker also served under Secretary of State Breyer, and said he had served admirably under Kobach. I have full confidence in Rucker's ability to carry out these responsibilities. Naturally, what he appointed him. Kobach's lead over stands at 110 votes on Friday evening as counting continues in the close primary. There, at one point, the gap was narrowed to 59 votes. The new results in the Secretary of State's office came as county reported votes from mail-in ballots arrived after Election Day. The vote counts is expected to change as county canvassing boards will begin meeting on Monday to sift through provisional ballots with two large counties, Sedgwick and Johnson. I believe Johnson is Kansas City. Sedgwick is Wichita. Both set to meet on Monday. Provisional ballots are cast when a voter's eligibility is in question. Kobach placed 191 votes at the end of counting on Wednesday, shrunk on Thursday as both Kobach and Collier were discovered in multiple counties. Thomas County, Collier received 100 votes more than what the Secretary of State. And this is one of the problems, too. There's been misinformation from the Secretary of State, period. The extraordinarily tight race, and this is something Uncle Carl didn't talk about, is the closest primary for governor in the history of Kansas, according to Smart Politics, a political newsletter site ran out of the University of Minnesota's Humphrey School of Public Affairs. The margin currently is less than 0.1% and would narrow the victory across 88 Republican Democratic precincts in Kansas since 1910. Only two primaries in state history have been decided by less than a percentage point. In 1950, which was a different time, the Kansas primary, and in 1974, according to the site, the average victory in 44 Republican primaries has been 34.7. Collier hires an attorney, a former U.S. attorney and current Republican chair, to assist with Todd Graves, current Missouri Republican Party chair, to assist with the legal libations in the counting and likely in the recount in the primary election. Again, as Derek Smith on Fridays, the Attorney General also instructed counties to preserve all election-related materials in anticipation of potential litigation. So this is a long story going here. The efforts for the past 2 days by the Secretary of State to discard valuable ballots has made it clear that he needs counsel to ensure that all Kansas votes are counted. As Collier campaign said in a statement to the Star, Governor Collier is confident that Todd Graves' experience as U.S. Attorney, and in particular his experience in election law, will be a valuable asset as we navigate the process. Graves is no stranger to the spotlight in his high-profile legal cases. Most recently, the Graves law firm represented former Governor Gattens. Graves was the Platte County prosecutor before G.W. Bush appointed him to the Western District of Missouri. In 2001, Graves served that role till 2006. So Graves has been in the business for quite a while. An attorney is now on board as we move to the litigation part of this. And what this basically does, as far as Kobach is concerned, it alerts the citizens. The results from the Secretary of State's office is in itself suspect. Now, this is Smart Politics. Just went to the site here. Kobach versus Collier. Nail biting is the closest gubernatorial race in Kansas history. This is by Dr. Eric Ostermeyer on the 8th of August. And this is the site here. And we'll just take a quick look at this out of Smart Politics from the Humphrey Institute. By less than 1/10 of a point, it currently held the lead there. The closest, their furious Republican gubernatorial nomination battle in Kansas could even closer than expected on Tuesday. Well, we went past that, but again, Bach, 40.6, and the governor less than 1 percentage point there over 44 cycles during which gubernatorial primaries have been held in the state. That's since 1910. The Republican nominee has emerged with plurality, of 17 of them at 38.6%. 9 of them with fewer than 40% of the vote. Smart Politics emphasizes the findings that less than 1/10 of a point margin between the two. They include the 2008 cycle. More than 1/3 of Republican gubernatorial primaries have been decided by a single digit. That's 15 of 44. With Democrats hosting 7 primaries decided by less than 10 points. And 2/3 of competitive major party contests. 2 others were decided by less than a percentage point. High Democratic nominees. And this goes in 1954 to George Docking. And it was 6/10 of a point their victory against the former governor and one-time nominee Woodring. In 1974, the state senator Bennett defeated a county attorney named Concannon, I guess, by 3/10 of a percentage vote in a 4-candidate field. Let me just go through some of these. In 1928, the former U.S. Representative Chauncey Little beat Wellington attorney and former legislator Ed Hinckley by 3.6 points. And let's get down to 1968. Restaurant owner Rick Harmon edged out Lieutenant Governor John Crutcher by 1.8 points and 1.8. And in 1990, let's see, we had the former treasurer John Finney, and 2-term governor John Carlin by 1.1 votes there. So there's been a history there, but not of the close races. This is an excellent article here. The average margin of victory in 44 GOP primaries has been 34.7, with Democrats decided by an average of 51.7. Not very many Democrats in between there. And Republican newspaper publisher Arthur Kapler and McPherson Farmer publisher Will West, and so forth and so on. But this is going back a very long time. Have usually not had a problem. This is Republican primaries attracting multiple gubernatorial hopefuls, with only 5 of the 44 nominees since 1910 winning the GOP nomination uncontested. And part of that is Kansas historically being a Republican state, dating way back there to the vice presidential nominee. Can't think of him right now, but that's how far back Kansas has went in their Republicanism. But Republicanism has changed in Kansas in that most of these governors were quote-unquote modern Republicans, or the tricky-dicky mold, I guess you would say, there. So in other words, little different situation. Let's see what else we have. 5 candidates ran. Oh, that was in 52. Charles Rooney, and in 1994, that was Congressman Jim Slattery. So this is really a long recital in the state of Kansas, but appreciative of this coming about here by Dr. Ostermeter and the Smart Politics Journal here. Anyway, let's go to Missouri now as we leave the state of Kansas and the announcement by Leslie McSpadden, the mother of Michael Brown. Let's listen to her announcement here. She is announcing it in the driveway of her home where her son Michael Brown was murdered. And we'll see if we can get to the beginning of this. We'll do it like this. We'll take a second here so to make sure that we get the entire announcement here by Ms. McSpadden.
Leslie, run.
Almost 4 years ago to this day, I ran down this very street. And my son was covered in a sheet. It broke me, you know. Brought me down to my knees and made me feel crippled as if I could do nothing else anymore from that moment. But as time went on and I stayed surrounded by support and motivational people who knew what happened was wrong and didn't give up the fight, I learned to walk again. And this is one of my first steps running for Ferguson City Council of 2019. 3 of my major things that I will focus on when I'm elected, because I'm speaking into existence.
Amen.
Yes. It's community policing.
Yes.
Economic equality.
Yeah.
And access to health care for all of Ferguson's young children and everyday people. And I know a lot of people may ask what makes me qualified. But I'll tell you, if a mother had to watch her son lay in the street for 4.5 hours and watch a community be completely disrespected by elected officials that we elected, what would you do? You would stand up and you would fight too. What we hear is a need for more, and we need a hear for better. And when you hear those two things together, it lets you know that something is missing, something is not there. And we absolutely know that the community and the police, though, that bridge has been burned. And I want to work on rebuilding it.
That was Leslie McSpadden speaking at a news conference in her driveway in Ferguson, Missouri. The very driveway that her son, Michael Brown, was murdered in Ferguson, Missouri. There was there was the attorney there, Ben Crump, who represented Michael Brown. He is an attorney out of the Tallahassee, Florida, I believe it's Plantation, Florida area. And one of the most brilliant civil rights attorneys in the land. He was there in her campaign. That'd be in 2019, but at least she started a campaign and a grassroots campaign. This is what progressive people are doing throughout the 50 continuous states that compose the United States. And we see more and more of this going on. She talked about healthcare and economic equality. You're hearing more and more the word economic equality, economic justice. The fight for 15, it all revolves around that particular item. And this is the Achilles heel for the Republican Party. We have on our Numbers Man report this week, we'll be talking about the position now of workers and their salaries, and where inflation is starting to eat into it. Now, this is at a very elementary very elementary state, excuse me. One of the reasons here, we won't go much to this, we'll talk about it on Numbers Man, that's a financial program, but we do macroeconomics there. But one of the reasons is many things, it takes time to filter into the economy, the effects, like the tariffs. But today things are speeded up. In years past, it would take a number of months, perhaps even a year or more, for those things to fully be affected. Now we're starting now to see some of that in that pricing has changed in anticipation of this. Example, IBM has boosted the price on equipment that they sell to data centers. These are with various components that come or sourced from throughout the world and could be affected by the tariffs. So in other words, it's a preemptive strike by many of these manufacturers, and that will filter also into the economy in the form of inflation. One of the things to always remember, anytime you have a tax cut and put quote-unquote more money into the system, you will have some inflation. Now, it's not that the inflation itself is a bad thing. It is not, but there's this sort of psyche in the American financial community about inflation. And when you have the type of programs that they're running now with all the military spending, deficits, etc., and jobs are created, you're going to have inflation. And inflation can become a problem, especially in an American economy, when it moves to, we'll say, 3.5%. But in an emerging economy, inflation 4 to 8% perhaps is not a bad situation, depending on the economy, because you need to get things rolling. But in this economy, there are a lot of problems that are coming. We've looked at housing starts; they are down. There are some things that are on the so-called crosstabs that we don't see normally. So we need to stay cognizant of what is going on there, the overall situation, and where gas is. I guess I can do this. We usually use Gas Buddies, but we'll use the AAA. The average price, $2.86. That is a national situation, period. And in some places it sort of rolled back a bit. These are some of the averages. A month ago it was still $2.86, and now it's $2.86. Well, depending on what you're buying also. Now this is so-called regular grade. Medium grade is what, $3.15. Premium at $3.40. So this is some of what is going on. We'll have more of this when we move to the Number Man report. And let's do the baseball scores now. And number of injuries in professional baseball is astonishing when we start looking at a number of these teams. Let's see what we have going on here. This is the PGA Championship. Crowds ample after Tigers' second straight birdie in the third round. Anyway, the leader there is G. Woodland, and Kistner is in second, and so forth and so on. But Tiger is always a big drive, and the more you see of Tiger, the more you see of things going on. So we'll pretty much leave it at that. We will look at the standings here. Hopefully we can get it up here. But we'll give the scores. Firstly, let's see if we can get the standings in these various leagues here. This is we've had some difficulty. I don't know why we're getting the standings the last few times. I'm not certain why it's going on. But anyway, we have it now, so we'll go ahead and do it. In the American League East, the Red Sox are on top. And the nearest competitor, the Yankees, 8 games back. Can't believe that. Tampa Bay is, forget it, 22.5 back there. This is in the East. The Orioles, 46.5. Well, we forget about that one. In the Central, Cleveland is on top. And that's a weak division. This is the American League. Minnesota is 14 games back. And they are basically imploding their whole team. The closer was traded, so they don't really have a closer now. But you have the Twins, the Tigers, and forget it. That's in the American League Central. In the American League West, the Houston Rockets obviously on top. The Oakland Athletics are 4.5 games back, and the Seattle Mariners are 6 games back. Now to the National League in the East. Atlanta is on top. The Phillies are pretty much they are tied up there. They're all playing 500 ball, as they say. And the Washington Nationals, they're 5.5 games back. So it's close in the National League East. In the National League Central, the Cubbies are on top. The Brewers are 3 games back. The St. Louis Cardinals are 6.5 games back. And the Pittsburgh Pirates are 8 games back. So it's a pretty close race going on there. In the West, we have the Diamondbacks are on top. And let's see. The Dodgers are pretty much close there. The D-backs have 64 wins and 53 losses. And the Dodgers have 64 and 53. So it's basically a tie. And we have the Colorado Rockies at 2.5 games back. And the Giants are 6 games back. So it's very tight in the National League West. On to the scores last night. The Nationals were in Wrigley Field. 3-2 was the score there. The Cubbies had 4 hits and 1 error. And the Nationals, we'll see what they had. Almost unbelievable here. Make sure. 9 hits. Oh, well. Anyway. The Red Sox were, where was the Red Sox? In a Camden Yard. One of these strange scores here. 19-12, very high score there. The line score, the Sox had 16 hits, 1 error, and the Orioles 17 hits, no errors. Anyway, the Rangers and Yankees in New York. The Rangers 12-7 there. The Rays and Blue Jays in Toronto. It was Rays 7-0. The Blue Jays were shut out. The Twins and Tigers in the Motor City. It was Tigers. Well, Philando Rodney is gone now. Anyway, 6-3. Score there. The D-backs and Reds in Cincy. It was the Reds, 3-0. They beat the D-backs, upsetting their race in the West of the National League. The Mets and Marlins in Florida. It was Mets 6-2. The Brewers in Atlanta. It was Atlanta 10-1. That was in Atlanta. Cleveland and the White Sox. The Sox got a 1-0 victory there. The Mariners and Astros. The Mariners actually beat the Astros in Houston 6-2. So the Mariners are starting to. Mr. Diaz got the save. They're starting to do some work here, we'll say. The Cardinals and Royals in Kansas City. The Cardinals shut out the Royals 7-0. The Dodgers and Rockies in the Mile High City. Rockies won this one 5-4. Line score: Dodgers got 10 hits and 2 errors, and the Rockies 9 hits and no errors won the game. The Athletics and Angels in Southern California, Los Angeles. 4-3 was the score. Look at it twice there. The Athletics had 6 hits, 1 error, and the Angels, I guess they were the Angels, 7 hits and no errors. The Phillies and Padres in San Diego. The Padres shut out the Phillies 2-0. And finally, the Pirates, and a game we tuned into. It was one of those who was going to win the game. And Giants, the final score was 10-13. Giants. The Pirates had 17 hits. They out-hit the Giants, but they finally lost the game. And the Giants had 16 hits. And Mr. Holmes got the loss. Mr. Holland got the win. So that is the scores there. These races are very interesting. Some of these seller teams, like the Twins, offloading everyone they can offload. And the Mariners, the Dodgers, they picked up a couple of players there. Everybody's trying in August, and not even the middle of August, to rev up their teams respectively. Some are in the second wild card race. On the Monday Morning Quarterback, we'll talk a little bit more about that. What we want to do on the Monday Morning Quarterback, a little more in depth in baseball and all about sports. We have several programs we started that are in the can. We'll get those out here in August. We've sort of been in a hole, but we're working to get out of it. Nonetheless, we'll see you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. We're on the iHeart app. We're on Stitcher. iHeart has over 800 stations. We're on YouTube. In other words, we're worldwide. And we still will get that talk show in. Hopefully the week coming up here, a live talk show. That'll be over on the Blog Talk Network, which is all part of One Now, Spreaker, Blog Talk, etc. They haven't really decided what they're going to do with Blog Talk. At one point there, they're inviting people on Blog Talk to come to Stitcher, but at the same time they're inviting people to come to Blog Talk. It's all the same network. The difference there is you have the live call-in feature, and hopefully when they finally merge these two together, they'll keep the call-in feature over on a Spreaker. We'll see. But you can find information on Twitter on the Boston Red, also on Facebook on the Boston Red, as we post up some of the information we find here from day to day. We'll do the polling. We haven't had any significant polling since last night. We did it on Friday Jobber. Nonetheless, have a good weekend. We'll talk to you on the Monday Morning Quarterback. Not certain about programming, special programming. Perhaps we'll look at one of the things we have in the can, and we're going to have to do this rather quickly, is a race out in the Midwest state of Minnesota. There's a primary there, gubernatorial primary. There was a debate. That probably will be our weekend program. Anyway,